The gym closed at 10 every night. Marcus Webb had been locking those doors for 12 years, teaching self-defense classes to soccer moms and corporate executives who wanted to feel tough for an hour twice a week. Nobody questioned why a man in his 50s ran such a modest operation in a strip mall in Richmond, Virginia. Nobody asked about the scars that covered his knuckles, or why he moved with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural for someone his age. The students learned basic holds, simple strikes, enough to feel confident walking to their cars at night. They never learned what Marcus really knew. They never saw what those hands could actually do. For 23 years, Marcus had been an instructor at the Marine Corps Martial Arts Center of Excellence, teaching close-quarters combat to men being deployed to the most dangerous places on Earth. He'd mastered 7 different fighting systems, authored training manuals that were still classified, and personally trained 3 generations of Force Recon Marines in the art of silent killing. Then his son was born, and Marcus made a choice. No more training killers. No more creating weapons disguised as men. He wanted to be a father, not a fighter. He opened his gym, taught watered-down techniques to civilians, and raised Michael to be everything Marcus wasn't. Gentle, kind. A college student studying social work who wanted to help troubled kids. Michael never knew his father could kill a man in 17 different ways without making a sound. He never knew that the quiet gym owner who drove him to school had once been called the Reaper by men who understood what that meant. But when Michael tried to break up a fight outside a convenience store and got stabbed by a gang member who thought kindness was weakness, Marcus remembered everything he'd spent years trying to forget. The techniques, the methods, the cold efficiency of close combat. And the gang members who laughed as his son bled out on the pavement were about to learn that some skills never fade. They just wait in the dark, patient and hungry, for the right moment to resurface. Welcome to a story about a father who spoke softly and carried the deadliest hands in Virginia. This isn't about guns or distance or staying safe. This is about a man who hunted his prey up close, personal, and absolutely silent. Marcus Webb spent 2 decades teaching Marines how to end fights in seconds, how to disable attackers without weapons, how to move through crowds like a ghost and leave bodies in their wake. He was considered one of the top 5 hand-to-hand combat instructors in the entire United States military. A man who could demonstrate killing techniques with such precision that even hardened infantry officers would feel their stomachs turn. But he walked away from all of it to raise his son alone after his wife died of cancer. Michael was 8 when his mother passed, and Marcus promised her he'd give their boy a peaceful life. No violence, no darkness. Just love and stability and the chance to be better than his father ever was. Michael grew up watching Marcus teach basic self-defense, never understanding that his dad was essentially showing people how to throw kindergarten punches while keeping the real knowledge locked away. Marcus was content with that arrangement. He'd seen enough violence, caused enough pain. His teaching job at the gym paid the bills, gave him purpose, and let him be present for Michael's entire childhood. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every baseball game, every moment that mattered. Michael graduated high school with honors, got accepted to Virginia Commonwealth University, and declared a major in social work. He wanted to help at-risk youth, kids caught up in gang culture, kids who needed someone to show them a different path. Marcus was proud beyond measure. His son had chosen compassion over violence, had chosen to build instead of destroy. Everything Marcus had sacrificed his former life for had been worth it. Until the night Michael stopped at a convenience store on his way home from an evening class. Until he saw 3 gang members beating a teenager in the parking lot. Until Michael, who'd been raised to stand up for those who couldn't defend themselves, intervened. The surveillance footage showed everything. Michael stepping between the attackers and their victim, words being exchanged, one of the gang members pulling a knife, Michael raising his hands, trying to de-escalate, using all the conflict resolution techniques his professors had taught him. Then the blade, 3 times, quick and brutal. Michael falling. The gang members laughing as they walked away, one of them turning back to kick Michael's body before they disappeared into the night. Marcus watched that footage 17 times in the detective's office, his face expressionless, his hands perfectly still. The detective apologized, said they were doing everything they could, that the gang members would be identified and arrested. Marcus nodded, thanked him, then went home to his empty house and opened the locked room he hadn't entered in 13 years. Inside were the remnants of his old life: training manuals, technique journals, equipment he'd kept for reasons he never quite examined. And in the back corner, a black bag containing everything he needed. Not weapons in the traditional sense, but tools. Zip ties, duct tape, a tactical knife that had never been registered, gloves, a change of dark clothing, the materials of close combat. Marcus sat on the floor of that room until sunrise, and when he stood, the gym owner was gone. In his place was something the Marines used to call the Reaper, and he was about to remind a very dangerous group of people why that name had once made grown men nervous. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. This story spread through underground fighting circuits across the country, and someone watching right now might have heard whispers about what happened next in Richmond. The gang called themselves the Southside Kings, a mid-level operation running drugs and protection rackets through 4 neighborhoods in Richmond. They weren't the biggest organization in the city, but they were violent enough and connected enough to operate with relative impunity. The 3 who killed Michael were known associates, not even full members yet, prospects trying to prove themselves worthy. Their names were Darius Cole, 18 years old with 2 priors for assault; Jamal Thompson, 19, already suspected in 1 other stabbing; and the one who'd actually held the knife, Marcus Little Mark Johnson, 17, but tried as an adult for a previous weapons charge. The police were building a case, but it would take time. Witnesses were afraid to talk. The surveillance footage was grainy. The prosecutor wanted everything airtight before making arrests. Marcus didn't have time, and he didn't need witnesses. He spent 3 days watching. The Southside Kings operated from a handful of locations, but their prospects hung around a particular corner, dealing small quantities and trying to look tough. Marcus observed their patterns from a distance, noting shift changes, who carried weapons, who was alert, and who was sloppy. He paid special attention to Darius, who seemed to be the least cautious of the 3. On the 4th night, Darius left his corner alone around midnight, walking 4 blocks to his girlfriend's apartment. He took the same route every time, cutting through an alley behind a closed laundromat because it shaved 2 minutes off his walk. Marcus was waiting in that alley at 11:50, positioned in shadow, invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for him. When Darius entered the alley, checking his phone and completely unaware, Marcus moved. The technique was called a rapid incapacitation approach. Close distance, in silence, neutralize the threat before they can react or cry out. Marcus had taught this method to hundreds of Marines, explaining how to approach sentries, how to position your body, how to apply the precise pressure needed to render someone unconscious without killing them. Usually. He crossed 8 feet of distance in less than 2 seconds, making no sound at all. His arm wrapped around Darius's throat in a rear-naked choke, his other hand controlling Darius's head, cutting off blood flow to the brain. Darius tried to struggle, dropping his phone, his hands clawing at Marcus's forearm. But Marcus had been doing this since before Darius was born, and he knew exactly how much pressure to apply. 7 seconds. That's how long it took for Darius to go limp. Marcus lowered him to the ground, checked his pulse to confirm he was alive, then zip-tied his hands and feet. He put duct tape over Darius's mouth and dragged him deeper into the alley, behind a dumpster where they wouldn't be seen. When Darius woke up 5 minutes later, Marcus was crouched in front of him, his face calm and almost gentle. He removed the tape from Darius's mouth slowly. Then he asked a simple question. "Why did you laugh?" Darius tried to act tough at first, demanding to know who Marcus was, threatening him with what the Kings would do. Marcus waited patiently for him to finish. Then he asked again. "My son was dying on the ground and you laughed. Why?" Something in Marcus's tone, the absolute absence of anger or emotion, made Darius pause.
He mumbled something about Michael being weak, about people needing to mind their business. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he explained what was going to happen next. He was going to ask Darius some questions about the gang's operations, about the other two prospects, and about their patterns and locations. If Darius answered truthfully, he'd wake up tomorrow with a bad headache and some bruises. If he lied or refused to talk, he'd start breaking bones systematically until Darius couldn't physically refuse
anymore. And Marcus wanted Darius to understand something important. He'd done this before, many times, to enemy combatants who'd been trained to resist interrogation, and they'd all talked, eventually. Darius looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something that made his earlier bravado evaporate. He talked. By the time Marcus rendered him unconscious again and left him zip-tied in the alley, he had everything he needed: names, addresses, schedules, the locations where the Kings kept their money and drugs, and most importantly, where he could find Jamal and Little Mark. Marcus walked home through empty streets, his hands steady, his breathing calm. The old skills were coming back, easier than he'd expected. Maybe they'd never really left. Jamal Thompson lived in a third-floor apartment with his mother and two younger siblings. Marcus had no intention of confronting him there, not with a family present. But Jamal had a habit that made him vulnerable. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, he worked out at a 24-hour gym across town, trying to build muscle and intimidate rivals. He went alone, late at night when the gym was nearly empty, and he always parked in the back of the lot. Marcus waited in that parking lot on Thursday night, positioned between two cars, practically invisible in the darkness. The gym had poor lighting in the rear section, a fact Marcus had noted during his reconnaissance. When Jamal emerged at 1:30 in the morning, tired from his workout and distracted by his phone, Marcus approached from behind. This time he didn't use a chokehold. He struck the back of Jamal's knee with a precise kick that buckled his leg, then followed with a strike to the nerve cluster in his shoulder that caused his right arm to go temporarily numb. Jamal tried to turn, tried to defend himself, but Marcus had spent 20 years teaching people how to fight multiple armed opponents simultaneously. One distracted teenager wasn't even a challenge. Within 6 seconds, Jamal was on the ground with Marcus's knee on his chest and a tactical knife pressed against his throat. Marcus spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked Jamal if he remembered the man they'd killed outside the convenience store. Jamal's eyes went wide and he tried to deny it, but Marcus pressed the knife just hard enough to draw a single drop of blood. He told Jamal not to lie, that he'd already talked to Darius, that he knew everything. Jamal started to cry, the tough gang prospect facade crumbling completely. He said it wasn't his idea, that Little Mark was the one who'd pulled the knife, that Jamal had just been there. Marcus asked why none of them had called for help, why they'd laughed, why they'd kicked his son's body like it was trash. Jamal had no answer that would satisfy a grieving father. Marcus explained what was going to happen. Jamal was going to disappear from Richmond, tonight. He was going to take whatever money he had, get on a bus, and never come back. If he stayed, if he contacted the Kings, if he warned anyone, Marcus would find him again, and next time the conversation wouldn't be so gentle. Jamal nodded frantically, agreeing to anything. Marcus stood up, allowing Jamal to scramble to his feet. He watched as Jamal ran to his car and drove away, speeding out of the parking lot like demons were chasing him. Marcus had no idea if Jamal would actually leave or if he'd run straight to the Kings. Either way, the message was spreading. Someone was hunting them. Someone who could get close without being seen. Someone who knew exactly how to hurt them. By morning, the South Side Kings would know something was very wrong, and they'd start looking for whoever was picking off their prospects. But they'd be looking for a rival gang, another crew making a move. They'd never suspect the quiet, middle-aged man who ran a self-defense gym. Not until it was far too late. Little Mark Johnson was different from the others. At 17, he already had a reputation for violence that made even full members of the Kings nervous. He carried a knife everywhere,
had used it multiple times, and seemed to enjoy hurting people. The detective had told Marcus that Little Mark was the one who'd actually stabbed Michael, and the surveillance footage confirmed it. He was also the hardest target. Little Mark never went anywhere alone. He was constantly surrounded by other gang members, always alert, always ready for violence. Taking him in a direct confrontation would be difficult, and would likely result in witnesses or additional casualties. Marcus couldn't allow that. So he changed tactics. Instead of hunting Little Mark directly, Marcus began dismantling the gang's operations around him. He started with their stash houses. Using the information Darius had provided, Marcus broke into 3 different locations over 5 nights. He didn't steal the drugs or money, he destroyed them. Flushed cocaine down toilets, burned cash in sinks, smashed
electronics, and tore apart furniture. He left each location in ruins, and he left a message spray-painted on the wall. For Michael. The Kings went into crisis mode. They assumed a rival gang was declaring war, and they pulled their people back, consolidated their operations, and started moving in larger groups for protection, which meant Little Mark was now constantly surrounded by 4 or 5 other members. Marcus watched and waited. He knew something the Kings didn't. In military combat, bunching up for security often created more vulnerability, not less. A group was louder, more visible, and more predictable than individuals. After a week of observation, Marcus identified their new pattern. The Kings were using a house on the east side as their main base, and they moved between locations in 2 cars, always traveling together. Little Mark was always in the second car. On a Wednesday night, as both cars traveled along a poorly lit industrial road, Marcus made his move. He'd positioned his truck across the road ahead of them, blocking their path. When the lead car stopped to investigate, Marcus emerged from the shadows and threw a spike strip behind them, puncturing the tires of the second car. Then he activated a compressed air horn, the kind used for marine safety, creating a deafening blast that disoriented everyone. The Kings poured out of their vehicles, confused and drawing weapons. But Marcus was already moving. He'd spent years training in what the Marines called close-quarters battle in multiple opponent scenarios. He knew how to use terrain, darkness, and chaos to his advantage. The first gang member went down when Marcus swept his legs and delivered a strike to the temple that rendered him unconscious. The second managed to pull a gun, but Marcus closed distance before he could fire, disarming him with a technique that involved breaking 3 fingers and redirecting the weapon. 2 more went down in rapid succession, Marcus moving through them like water, never staying in one place, using their numbers against them. Each engagement lasted seconds. Each opponent fell without Marcus taking a single hit. Within 90 seconds, 6 gang members were on the ground, unconscious or injured. Only Little Mark remained, standing by the second car with his knife drawn, his eyes wide with fear. Marcus approached slowly, his hands empty, his breathing barely elevated despite the violence he'd just inflicted. He told Little Mark to drop the knife. Little Mark refused, his hands shaking but his grip tight. He asked who Marcus was, why he was doing this. Marcus told him. He explained that the man Little Mark had killed, the social work student who'd been trying to help, was his son. That Michael had been the only good thing in Marcus's life. That everything Marcus had done, every sacrifice he'd made, had been to give his son a chance at a better life than his father had lived. And Little Mark had taken that away for no reason at all. Little Mark tried to run. Marcus caught him in 3 strides, disarmed him with a wrist lock that made Little Mark scream, and forced him to the ground. For the first time since Michael's death, Marcus felt genuine anger. Not the cold calculation of a trained fighter, but the hot rage of a father whose child had been murdered. He could end it right there. Break Little Mark's neck, crush his throat, use any of a dozen techniques that would kill him in seconds. Instead, Marcus stood up and called the police. The 911 call came from an anonymous phone, a burner Marcus had bought specifically for this purpose. He reported a gang fight on the industrial road, multiple people injured, weapons on scene. Then he disappeared into the darkness before the first siren sounded.
By the time police arrived, they found 6 gang members unconscious or groaning in pain, another barely coherent and babbling about being attacked by a ghost, and little Mark Johnson, zip-tied with his own knife lying next to him, the murder weapon that forensics would later match to Michael Webb's wounds. The investigation was complicated. Multiple gang members with injuries consistent with expert hand-to-hand combat, no witnesses willing to explain what happened, security cameras in the area mysteriously malfunctioning. The evidence pointed to a professional, possibly military-trained, who'd systematically taken down an entire gang crew single-handedly. Detective Morrison, who'd been working Michael's case, stood on that industrial road as dawn broke and felt pieces clicking into place. The disrupted stash houses, the disappeared prospects, the targeted attacks. Someone had been hunting the Southside Kings, and that someone had just gift-wrapped the case she'd been building. When she went to talk to Marcus Webb the next day to inform him that they'd arrested Michael's killer and had the weapon, she found him teaching a morning self-defense class to 3 middle-aged women
who were practicing enthusiastically. He looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a mild-mannered gym owner who taught basic techniques to suburban clients. But Morrison had pulled his military records. She knew what he'd done for 2 decades, even if the specific details were classified. She knew that the man showing retirees how to break a wrist hold could probably disarm and incapacitate everyone in the building in under a minute. After the class ended, Morrison asked Marcus if he knew anything about the incidents involving the Southside Kings. Marcus said he'd heard about it on the news, said he was grateful that his son's killer had been caught, said he hoped justice would be served. Morrison studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or guilt. She saw only a grieving father who looked exhausted and sad. She told him that little Mark Johnson was being charged with second-degree murder and would likely spend decades in prison, that the other gang members were facing various charges, that the Southside Kings were essentially dismantled, their operations in chaos, their members too afraid to reorganize. Marcus nodded slowly and thanked her for the update. As Morrison left, she paused at the door and said something that made Marcus's breath catch. She said that whoever had taken down those gang members had shown remarkable restraint, that despite the violence involved, no one had been killed or permanently injured, that whoever did it had been precise, controlled, and careful not to cross the line from justice into murder. She said that kind of discipline was rare and admirable. Then she left without waiting for a response. Marcus stood in his empty gym for a long time, processing what she'd said. Morrison knew. Maybe couldn't prove it, maybe wouldn't even try, but she knew. And she'd chosen to let him know that she understood why. That night, Marcus returned to the locked room in his house. He carefully packed away the equipment he'd used, sealed the black bag, and placed it back in the corner. He spent an hour going through Michael's belongings, allowing himself to finally grieve properly, without the cold focus of planning violence. His son was gone. Nothing would change that, but the people responsible would face consequences. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus had proven that you could use terrible skills for something resembling justice without becoming a monster yourself. The line was thin, and he'd walked it carefully, but he'd stayed on the right side. Barely.
out. They'd heard rumors through military channels about what happened in Richmond. They never asked directly, but they offered support, showed up to help with the gym, and made it clear that Marcus wasn't alone. One former student, now a lieutenant colonel, visited and spent an hour talking with Marcus over coffee. He said that the hardest thing about teaching men to be warriors was helping them understand that violence was a tool, not a solution. That the strongest people were the ones who could do terrible things but chose not to. That Marcus had always taught them to be protectors, not predators. And everything that happened in Richmond, whatever the truth was, fell on the right side of that line. Marcus appreciated the support, even if he couldn't acknowledge what they were really saying. The man he'd been, the reaper who'd moved through the darkness, ending fights in seconds, had returned briefly. But he hadn't taken over. Marcus had used those skills with precision and control, never killing, never crossing into the pure vengeance that would have dishonored Michael's memory. A year after Michael's death, Marcus received a letter. It was from Jamal Thompson, postmarked from North Carolina. The letter was brief. Jamal had left Richmond as instructed. He'd gotten a job, enrolled in community college, and cut all ties with gang life. He said he thought about that night in the parking lot every day, about how Marcus could have killed him, but didn't, about how that mercy had given him a chance to become something different. He said he was sorry about Michael, and he understood that apology meant nothing. But he wanted Marcus to know that he was trying to live differently, to honor the chance he'd been given. Marcus read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. He'd never respond, never reach out, never confirm or deny anything. But knowing that at least one person had chosen a better path because of that night made something in his chest feel slightly less tight. Detective Morrison stopped by occasionally, never officially, just dropping in to check on him. They'd talk about nothing important, avoid the topics that mattered, and maintain the fiction that she was just being kind to a grieving father. But once, as she was leaving, she mentioned that violent crime in that part of Richmond had dropped by 40%, that 3 other gangs had either disbanded or moved operations elsewhere, that sometimes the system needed help from people who understood violence intimately enough to use it surgically. Marcus never confirmed anything, but Morrison smiled slightly and nodded before leaving. The understanding between them was complete and unspoken. As the 2nd anniversary of Michael's death approached, Marcus stood in his gym after closing, looking at the framed photo of his son he'd hung by the entrance. Michael's smile, captured at his college graduation, radiated the kindness and hope that had defined him. Marcus had spent his life teaching men to hurt others efficiently. His son had chosen to heal instead. And in a strange way, Marcus's final mission had honored both paths. He'd used violence not for conquest or revenge, but for protection and justice. He'd been surgical, controlled, and measured. He'd removed threats without becoming one himself. The black bag remained in the locked room untouched. Marcus hoped it would stay that way forever, but he also knew himself well enough to understand that some skills, once learned, never fully sleep. They wait, patient and ready, for the moments when good people need to do hard things to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Marcus Webb, the quiet gym owner who taught basic self-defense to suburban clients, locked his doors and walked home through streets that felt a little safer than they had 2 years ago. And somewhere in the darkness, the Reaper rested, no longer hunting, but never quite gone. Just waiting. Just in case.